If I'm watering with a center pivot, you know, out there at the far end of the pivot, it's putting water down in a real hurry. A real hurry. And it looks something like this. Well, let's do one more. Let's look at a clay before we get to our center pivot. What's a clay going to look like? Lower, because remember we said it's good to probably about 1/10 of an inch an hour. Is about where we're going to dial in that clay. So he's going to be down here at about 0.10, and he's going to level out. He's going to look something like this. Okay? That's going to be a clay. Here's what happens when we run a center pivot. Center pivot comes, now we're talking about out at the last tower. You know, in a center pivot, in close to the pivot, it takes a long time, say 20 hours to make one revolution. Well, that first tower and the second tower, they're just poking along. And it's got 20 hours to put down its amount of water. Usually we put down around a 1/2 inch to 1 inch of water every time we make a pass with a center pivot, somewhere in that neighborhood. So it's lollygagging along. It doesn't have to put water down very fast to get its 1/2 inch to 1 inch of water down in close. No problem intake rate there. But out at the end, it only has about 30 to 45 minutes to get, say, 1 inch of water down. So it's got to do it in a real hurry. It's only got about this long to do it. Say 30 minutes. It has to get a whole inch down. So it starts just a few little drops, peaks up like this, comes down like that, and that would be its time frame for watering. It has to dump 1 inch of water down within a short band of time, so all of this water in a clay soil runs off. We had to put it on too fast. So we have to be really careful the soils we pick and the type of sprinkler system we use running center pivots. There's a lot of ground you just can't run a pivot on because you have to put the water down so cotton picking fast out on the end, the soils can't handle it. So there are places it just doesn't work. Plus those kind of soils are real gummy and it's real hard to get the tires to walk through them. You end up going through gumbo. You know, the tire that was this tall, all of a sudden with the mud on, it's this tall. You know, you've all been out walking through a field with a lot of clay in it, and pretty soon your size 12 shoes a size 22.
And weighs 22.
And weighs, yeah, about twice the weight of your leg. But so this is what happened. We get this very spiked, real high, instantaneous intake rates, but it's over with in 30 minutes. You're done watering. Hey, that sand handled it all. We're probably right on the squeaky edge of the silt here. It might have a little trouble, see? We get up in here, we might have cost ourselves a little bit of ponding or runoff with the silt soil. The clay or the sand, it didn't have any trouble at all, man. It took that water like nothing. It's, you know, it's got all kinds of room to spare. So sandy soils, we can put about any kind of irrigation system on a sandy soil. It's going to take the water. Get into real heavy soils, you can get into real trouble. Get into a lot of these solid set areas where they're growing orchard on steep hillsides up in the mountains where there's more clay in the soils. That can be real dangerous. So we have to go to things like microsystems to be able to do that. Real low intake rates, because you're looking at this 1/10 of an inch an hour problem that you got when you get out here on a clay. You know, gosh, we put a wheel line on a clay soil, we get out here to about hour and 20 minutes, we're in big trouble. If we're putting on that 1/4 of an inch an hour. Can't do it. We got to find a system that can only apply it at a 1/10 of an inch an hour. So that wheel line or hand line ain't going to work.
Cheaper to do the system than just do the soil?
Question is it cheaper to do the system than the soil? Well, you're living with the soil. You know, you're not going to amend that soil too much. without massive expense. And you know, you're talking major dollars to bring in new soil. It's prohibitive. So you got to live with what you got and figure out how to live with what you got. Use something that's going to work. Yeah. Now, when we get into these clay soils, you get over on the west side of the mountains and golf courses, you're going to run into a lot of clay soils. So what you do is you water real short periods of time. You burp it on there for 5 minutes and you're off. And you come back 2 or 3 hours later, you give it another 5 minutes and you're off. And maybe one more time through the night, you'll come back for 5 more minutes if it needs it. But you go real high intensity, but real short run times. So you're taking advantage of this instantaneous zone in here in that first 30 minutes or so. You can put a lot of water down in a rush. And you learn real quick when you run it too long, because then you start having puddling or runoff. And so you have to, you know, the book isn't going to tell you everything, because there's a few other things that affect the intake rate. And let's go down the list here. We got the list.